STAR versus what I teach, right? So here's my thing. I use this analogy with everybody I talk to, and I call it the director's dilemma, right? Because interviewing is just like storytelling. It is storytelling. You are telling your story, but you have to tell it the right way. Otherwise, your interviewer is not going to know the really good things that you've done, right? So I use an analogy called the director's dilemma.
Right.
And in the director's dilemma, think about James Cameron, think about Steven Spielberg, the great directors out there that tell really good stories. How do they tell a story? Do they just tell the story? No. What they do is they work from the audience based on how they feel,
right,
and tell the story based on how that person feels. If it's a comedy, you feel laughter. If it's a thriller, you feel anxiety, right? In
right.
an interview, we want them to feel like hiring us, right? So how do we do that? So I use a different method than STAR, and I call it SIPSy. It's just my own term for it. But basically, it's setting the scene is the first S, right? So a lot of times I have people who struggle with they'll just jerk into the story. They'll start telling the story, right? Like halfway through, and the interviewer is lost at this point. Your goal is you want them to visualize the
Right.
beginning, right? How did you figure out about this? Who were the stakeholders? What were the implications of that, right? And you want them to visualize what's going on, because naturally, when you tell a story, we all think about something. When I tell you a story about a dusty apartment complex that's being constructed, you think about this apartment complex with white chalk everywhere, right? So you want to set the scene appropriately so that they are easing into the story and it's easy to follow. The next is P, which is the problem. And the problem, of course, is very similar to the content, is your problem itself. And you have to make sure that you're telling it correctly so that you're making the problem big enough so that your interviewer feels that weight, feels the gravity, feels the magnitude of what's going on, right? Next is the solution, which is the other S. So the solution to your problem, but most importantly, the contributions from that solution and how you solve the problem itself, right? This is where a lot of people struggle, and they use we versus I. And I tell everyone you have to use I versus we, because you're going to have interviewers who will take it for granted and say, well, I don't know what he said. I don't know what his contributions were in that example. And if they're inexperienced, they won't dig deeper and ask what those contributions were, right?
Yeah.
So lastly is impact, right? And that's the I. Like what did this lead to? What did this impact? What did this do? And how did this create? Did you take a process from 6 steps to 1 step? Did you increase revenue? Did you increase profit? Did you decrease risk? All of that. So that's SIPSy. That's what I teach. I think STAR's fine. If you want to use STAR, it's great. But I think the way that I do it, it makes people think bigger about problems you're solving versus just like a daily task that's transactional. And this makes your example transformational versus transactional.